They are connecting and have had lifelong habits of deeply connecting.
For Mildred, the formula is simple. Keep moving, keep reading, and keep connecting with others. Every week, she puts that philosophy into practice on the dance floor.
I started writing down. That's what I do. I just write down every day what I do. It's just simple things, my breakfast, and nothing extraordinary. But it helps to keep my memory when you write things down. It helps to keep your mind going. But some of the secrets, and I try to eat well, and I don't put on any weight. I don't take any medication. Well, I'm fortunate I can do what I like myself. I mean, I've been on my own 30 years. Yeah, but I have a good son and daughter that help me, and grandchildren. Yeah.
My name is Dr. Angela Roberts, and I'm on faculty at Western University. I'm the Canada Research Chair in Data Analytics and Digital Health in Cognitive Aging and Dementia.
And in terms of the title for the SuperAgers, do you have a title for that?
I am. I'm the principal investigator of the Canadian arm of the Super Aging Research Initiative.
Okay, let's talk about SuperAgers. Who are they, and what makes them different?
What makes them super?
Yeah.
SuperAgers are really an amazing group of people who are 80 and older, and whose cognitive abilities are more like those in their 50s and 60s, often decades younger than their age is. And it's not just kind of fancy tricks on a memory task. We do see that SuperAgers have less brain shrinkage or less brain atrophy as they get older. And there's actually regions of their brain that are enhanced compared to typical 80-year-olds, and we can talk about that. But they are an interesting group of people who seem to be defying age-related brain changes, both in behavior in terms of memory and cognitive functions, but also in terms of just how the brain is changing as we get older.
So what's their secret? That's that whole question of, is it something they were just born with? Is it the genes? Or is it something they've been doing?
That's a really good question. One of the, in this body of research, which is now almost 10 years old, our Canadian version of this study is younger, but the whole body of research is a little over 10 years old. And one of the things we've discovered is genetics certainly play a role, but they are not the whole of the story. And so, for example, SuperAgers share similar risks for dementia as do other 80-year-olds who are not necessarily aging this way. So we have a control group in this study that are people 80 and older who are performing like 80-year-olds on measures of cognition. And when we compare those two groups together, we see only a marginally reduced risk for Alzheimer's disease. In fact, some of our SuperAgers who are 100 and older actually would fall into the highest risk group for having Alzheimer's disease. And we may see evidence of disease after they die because we have a brain donation program, but they don't develop the Alzheimer's dementia or the behavioral profile of the dementia in life.
What makes them have the higher risk, though? I don't understand that part.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about risk for Alzheimer's dementia, we know that there's a particular gene called ApoE. And when people have what's called an E4 allele. You have two alleles on this gene. When people have at least one E4 allele, they're at increased risk for dementia. When you have two E4 alleles, you are at exceptionally, we think, higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, which can lead to Alzheimer's dementia. And so some of our SuperAgers who are 100 and older actually have two of those E4 alleles, meaning that by all conventional wisdom, they probably should have developed Alzheimer's disease to a significant enough severity that they would develop Alzheimer's dementia. And we don't necessarily see that. Now, they are exceptions, and they are unusual exceptions to what we see, but they still are out there, which kind of allows us to open up this box to say maybe it's not all genetics. We look at as well, are there protective genes, and we've started to identify some of those. But even when we look at gene risk and we look at gene protection, that does not seem to be painting the entire picture of what allows these people to age so robustly as they get older. So lifestyle is certainly a factor here. And we know that. We know that even in studies of dementia, that about 40% of our risk for dementia can be offset with exercise and diet. And we see that in our superagers as well. Part of what my lab has done in this study is we are the first group in the world to actually look at the everyday behaviors of people 80 and older in the wild, so to speak. So we put wearable devices on them. We measure their sleep behavior, their activity behavior, their social engagement behavior over about 10 days in the study and 24 hours a day. And so we get this robust picture of how many steps they're taking, how much they exercise, how they sleep, the quality of their sleep. And it is this kind of first picture really of the behavior of 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, 100-year-olds, not just in Canada, but across North America. And so that's helped us to understand that the story really is not just genetics. Our superagers, and one of the findings that we see that separates them from controls is they have good quality sleep and what we call high sleep efficiency and very consistent sleep efficiency. So, what does that mean? It means that night to night, they are getting a more robust quality of sleep compared to the time that they're in bed. So they're not waking up a lot in the night. They are falling to sleep quickly after they go to bed. They have routine bed habits, so going to bed and getting up at the same time. And these components of sleep efficiency are really important for protecting the brain because it's in sleep where we push out some of the toxic waste and some of the proteins that misfold to cause dementia. It's how our brain kind of flushes that out. That all happens in our sleep. So this story of kind of sleep as a protective factor really seems to be emerging as part of the story here in our superagers.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because it seems like sleep is finally having a moment. Like I just seem to remember it was like go, 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 go. It says, I didn't sleep. Sleep is for when you're dead or all that
Yes.
kind of stuff, right?
Really good
Now
point.
I think people are really starting to see the value of sleep. How far back in your life would you need to have those sleep habits to make it effective to be a super ager?
This is a fantastic question and one that we don't fully have the answer to yet. The super aging research program is really interesting, right? Most aging studies, with few exceptions, usually cap enrollment around the age of 80. And some studies of aging actually cap enrollment at the age of 70. And so, if you're thinking about enrolling people who are 70 and younger, and you're thinking at the extreme edges of enrolling people who are 80 and younger, then we're missing out on this whole population. And that's important because people 80 and older are actually the fastest growing age demographic in Canada and around the world, right? And yet we know very little about their health. So, to your question, most of what we have known in the past about sleep and sleep quality and why it's important has really come from people who are 50 and 60. And we've got very little outside of the work that will be coming out from our group shortly, evidence of what happens to people who are 80 and older. So, where this magic line exists, right? Do you need to be sleeping well from your 20s, your 40s, your 60s? Or is it possible to kind of restore sleep health and still have this brain protective factor into your 70s and 80s? That question still needs a little bit of work yet to be answered. I think what our super agers continually teach us is that brain health and taking actions to protect your brain health, we're never too old to take that on. And so we have super agers who did not start being really robust in their physical activity until they were in their 70s or even late 70s, early 80s. And now they are setting track records around the world. they are hiking in Spain. So it is not necessary, and they have this resilient brain health. And they will say to you, before the age of 70, I was allergic to exercise. I just, I was active in my daily life, but I didn't have a formal exercise, program or plan. For some, they say they started in their 60s or 70s. So it is, while early is always better, and we have some evidence from the dementia literature that says, being physically active from your 40s is really important. Having good sleep habits earlier in life is really important. I think part of the story of SuperAgers is they're giving us inspiration that we can still probably reap some of the benefits on brain health, even if those paths start a little bit later in life.
Wow, that's exceptional. Like, are those people the exceptional um that they didn't exercise before 60 and
Mhm.
now they're super agers, or is
Yeah.
that
I will say it's more than one.
okay?
It's, these are not, when I convey these stories, they are not,
Mm,
we certainly have superagers who were, we have some in our Canadian cohort, for example, who have had high profile lives in Canadian sport and Canadian
mhm.
activity. And so, we certainly have clusters of people who have been active or would have, have had a discipline, right, of being physically active throughout their lives. But we also have a substantial cluster of people who did not do that and only had the time to exercise or became committed to exercise later in life. So I would say that there's this kind of probably three clusters that tend to emerge from our data. People who have always been active, people who have late life starts in activity, and then even a small proportion of superagers today who would describe themselves as being uh, intentionally physically active, but not necessarily setting exceptional physical activity records. They do just enough to get by.
Like they're gardening or
They're
something, or
gardening,
they're
they're
not.
taking walks, they're maybe
Mm,
doing, an exercise class twice a week.
mm.
What they do all share in common, and I think this is even true on the side of sport and activity, is they have a deep social connection to the world around them. And so many of them are doing exercise in a social context. They are connecting and have had lifelong habits of deeply connecting to other humans, not necessarily having 100 friends. This is not about having, your socials all stacked up with 1,000 followers, right? This is about having within your deep, intimate friend circle groups of people that you really trust and that you share in that ability to have connected conversations and this link, this kind of deeper social link. They share that in common almost uniformly. And even as relationships have changed as they've aged, right? They have lost friends to death. They may have retired and had life changes. They've prioritized keeping that connected inner circle of staying engaged with a group of people that they are close to, and also being active in their communities. And that is kind of some of the universal traits of what we see in superagers, that seems to be also driving some of these good brain health outcomes.
What is the reason for the social aspect? And can it be like one person? Can it be just your significant other? Or is it the
Yeah.
fact that you're socializing with more people?
Yeah, this is a really great observation, and I'm going to kind of highlight what comes out of our research, but also what comes out of the aging research globally. So what we know from the aging research around social connection and social engagement is that as we get older, there may be a deeper need to have deep social connections than when we are younger. And so exercise is always important, but as we get older, so is that social connectedness. And in fact, there are some studies that would show that that social connectedness, that sharing of a kind of mental mindset in a social space with others, may be more important than physical exercise as we get into the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's still research that needs more work done in that space to understand what what the balance is between the two. But there are at least some hints in some studies around the world that social engagement may be as important as exercise as we get older. And what this research also shows is it is not about the number of people. It is about the closeness and uh, lack of, or for lack of any other explanation, a shared intimacy. That could be with your singular spouse. But one of the things that we can also find in this literature is that it is helpful if it is not just your partner in life, right? That having, while a closeness of one matters, having this kind of I contribute to this deeper network, not just taking from that social network, but actually connecting to and giving to that social network is really important. And so I wouldn't say it's about numbers. I would say it's about depth of connection, and it's about a sense of meaning and purpose in life. We throw those terms around and they're easy to throw around, right? And meaning and purpose in life. But when we interview SuperAgers and kind of understand their life narratives, their life stories, and look at what that arc has been of their life, one of the things that comes out consistently is this idea of being connected to community, always feeling as if even when life wasn't going well, there was still a purpose and a drive to what they were doing in their lives, and this sense of resilience. Now we can counter that, and this is where it becomes important to think about why social engagement, why social connection might be important. So when we look at the opposite side of that, which is social isolation, which has become an incredibly huge problem here in Canada, magnified after COVID, especially for aging adults. Social isolation has negative effects on health. In fact, we know that when people are more socially isolated, they're at higher risk of cardiac disease, they are at higher risk of stroke, and they are at higher risk of dementia. And this is more than just not having someone to talk with, so there's this kind of social component where if you don't have a lot of people in your life, maybe you're not getting out and you're not doing as much, but it's more than that. Research has long since shown that when we are socially isolated and we experience high degrees of social deprivation, it actually acts on the cellular aspects of our functioning. So it affects mitochondrial function in terms of the energy stores of cells in our body. It can lead to accelerated protein misfoldings that lead to dementia. So there's a biological effect, not just a social effect of when we are isolated from others. So when we counter that with seeing in SuperAgers this deeper connectedness, some of that makes sense, right? That in the same sense that social isolation may be bad for our brain, the counter to that is that in our SuperAgers who have very good cognitive resilience, we're seeing this increased connectedness to their community and to a set of social contacts.
That's amazing, that knowledge that we know that there is such a physical body of evidence linking
It
the
is.
social aspect here. We always talk about it here at Unison at Kerby Centre about the importance of connectedness, and but
Oh, it is.
when you say that the definitive proof of it
Mhm.
is really remarkable.
I looked at some of the programs that you all offer, and I thought,
Mhm.
oh gosh, this is just a shining example of bringing people together, right? Bringing people together with purpose and mission, and the intergenerational components of bringing younger people and older folks together, which is so critical in this space as well, because friend dynamics change. And many of our SuperAgers, their sect of friends are often younger than they are. One, because many people in their age group have passed away. And those that may be in their age group may not be able to be as active as they often are. And so they do attract younger friends around them. Plus, there's just a wisdom, right? There's just such a wisdom of having lived life well that gets passed on. But I think this idea of needing from a societal standpoint, and I often, every time I have the chance to shout this from the rooftops, societally, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're building programs and communities and living environments where older adults can thrive. And it's not just about people 80 and older living well. It's about when they are alive, the legacy of knowledge that they hold about society and maybe some of the problems that we are encountering today, everything from AI and the moral and ethical ways that we need to be thinking about that societally, what it means to be human, to environmental and climate causes, to food scarcity. Many in this age group have faced these problems at different times or similar problems, certainly not the AI problem, but massive societal changes, most definitely. And the wisdom and insights that they have make us a better society. So, creating a world where they can function, thrive, engage, age well is not just about them, it's about the rest of us as well. And it's about the larger societal fabric.
I love you getting on the rooftop and talking about that one.
How's that?
Intergenerational is huge, and I think we only, I mean, I could do a whole nother episode on that, but it's only since uh, North American society where we've lived in separate
Yeah,
homes, right? I look back at
yeah,
my grandparents' generations in Austria, it was three generations in a home,
yes.
right? And that's just the way it was, and all that knowledge from Oma and Opa was passed down, and yeah, it's a
And vital and we're seeing a change where I'm going to say our original wave of immigrants to Canada that came post-war or that came from more that European centric space, we have changed our living environments often where children now live, someone lives on the West Coast and someone lives on the East Coast. But our newer wave of immigrant families coming in do still often live in this more collective
Mhm,
family structure. And so we are seeing a rise again, perhaps, of what we think about as collectivism or social collectivism in family structures. And it impacts aging care and it certainly impacts dementia care. But we don't, I will say, as a country, we don't necessarily understand enough of that
mhm,
because our own way of living has changed so much.
mhm,
And nor are we programmed well to consider that. So, the other half of my life is in dementia research, and I spend quite a bit of time with caregivers of people with dementia, and including many of our SuperAgers who have been caregivers of loved ones with dementia. And we're very interested in caregiver health. And so many of the programs that we've built are around a single kind of partner caregiver, someone's spouse or a daughter of someone with dementia. And in these family units, it's much more collectivist, right? How are we going to help the entire family cope with the shifts of aging and the shifts of dementia? And yet our healthcare system, our program systems are not well designed for that. And so we need to do better. I think
mhm.
because there's also much for us to be learned around possible benefits of that kind of collectivism and collective family approach to changes in aging and changes in health.
Agreed. Okay, so going back to what we talked about, the secrets to the super agers, we talked about some of it genetic, then we talked about sleep, we talked about exercise and social. How about diet? Is that part of it too?
Diet is a really good question. We do not, in our current study, and in large part because it's very challenging to do diet studies. And one of the reasons why we did wearable devices, and I'll take a tiny aside here is, and I say this when I give talks, people lie if you ask them what they're doing in good health. Or maybe I should say people paint themselves often in a positive light. And so if we just ask people about their behaviors, we don't often get as transparent an answer as would be ideal for science. And in fact, we know this that the we have data from our own superagers that shows that their self-reports do not necessarily agree with our objective sensor-based data of how much they're doing, exercise, sleep, or otherwise. So we know there is a little bit of optimistic reporting, perhaps in these groups. And so diet logs then become really challenging for us to keep and make sure that we're getting correct information. But we are in the next phase of the study, which will start September-ish. One of the things that we're planning on doing, and we're starting to get some of these data now, is actually looking at the gut biome, which gives us a little bit of information around, both historical and current kind of impacts of diet on the overall biome and how that's linked to brain health. if you look around the world at studies of superagers, we have the blue zone studies that certainly show, eating healthy fats and low in protein, or sorry, eating healthy fats, lean proteins, lots of vegetables, and eating in a social context is probably important. The dementia literature recently has shown that the MIND diet, which is like a Mediterranean version of the Mediterranean diet for the brain, so diet high in berries, again, lean proteins, low in saturated fats, can be very, very good for us. But in our super agers, we've not necessarily yet seen that diet effect. Even when we ask them, just loosely about what they eat. It's a range of things. What they probably, if there's one consistency I've learned, it's that they probably eat more fiber than most of the rest of us. And for some, that's been a lifelong commitment. The other thing that we sometimes will see is that they are exceptionally routine about everything. So whether it's sleep habits or dietary habits, they are, stop short of saying rigid, but very, very routine about what they do, the times of day that they eat, the types of foods that they eat. And so there's a routine aspect that, again, if you explore this with them historically, seems they would say to have always been a characteristic of how they've eaten. But we have not necessarily explored that full diet question yet, only the kind of the habits around how they eat.
Yeah, routine seems to be that comes up in all of the ones that we've discussed here, all
Yeah.
these other pillars. And going back to the Super Agers study, where are we at right now with it? Do you still need more people to be enrolled, or what's the
We
status of it?
do. Yeah, we do. There's a couple of ways. So we are entering year 5 of our current kind of block of the study, and we'll be taking that into the next year as well, and applying for kind of renewal of funding, which we anticipate getting. So the study will be continuing on. We are still enrolling in Canada, and we're enrolling in 2 ways. One, the actual Super Aging Research Initiative. And we're also expanding this research to include people who are 80 and older who may not be aging as well, so that we can kind of look at this fuller constellation of people, for example, with physical frailty, as well as those who may be super agers. We think, and our super agers have told us here in Canada that that's a really important part of the study. And so we have not only the Super Aging Research Initiative, but some satellite studies that we're running on the Canadian side that will allow us to explore more fulsomely the experience of aging in Canada. Thinking about rural families as well as urban families. Again, questions that are distinct, I think, to our Canadian landscape as we get older. Um, we are looking more at that social engagement piece because that's an expertise in my lab, and thinking about how do we quantify, for example, social connections in someone who lives in a rural community versus someone who lives in an urban community by way of example. So we have taken the Super Aging Research Initiative, we've brought it here, we continue to be a part of that international study, but have tried to tailor some of our future steps in our future research to really meet the questions that are important to Canadians. So yes, whether it's the Super Aging Research Initiative or other studies that we kind of have in this area, we are still actively enrolling and actively doing research.
Well, I'm glad because I could send a few your way here from Unison at Kerby Centre that I can think of right now that they're just remarkable.
Yeah,
That
and we've been thinking about, sorry, I didn't mean to, I interrupted, but I didn't mean to. We've been thinking about how we do more of this remotely, right? So we don't
Mhm.
require or have to have people travel.
Mhm.
And so that piece for us is a super important component. So we do have a couple of studies right now that are completely virtual, so we can manage that and leave people in Alberta, and they don't, necessarily need to come here,
Mhm.
or wherever they are in Canada. And that was something else that we deal with that some of our study partners in other parts of the world don't. Like, we are a huge country. And the groups who settled across our country are very different. And the commitment to how people age and even the cultural aspects of how people age is very different across this country. So we've listened to our superagers who have said, we really need to be doing this research differently, and that's why we've started some of these other study formats that would let us get at that.
Awesome. So do you, just to clear that up, do you have to be in your immediate sphere
Not
to be part of this, or you
necessarily.
can be? Okay.
Yeah, not necessarily. So we have so for many of our studies, no, and even for the Super Aging Research Initiative, we have a travel budget where we will bring people to us if that's what we need to do. The Super Aging Research Initiative right now, the more formal study does collect brain imaging, so we do
Mhm.
need to get people here for an MRI scan that's done in a specialized research scanner. But we have studies that don't require that also to where we could
Okay.
enroll people who may not be able to do that.
Okay. So if we have some people that are interested here,
Yes,
we
you
can
can
just
absolutely send them.
awesome.